The tale opens with a man named Samadari, standing beneath a downpour that looks almost like crimson rain. He pleads with his superior to finish off the child as well, warning that sparing him will only lead to regret. But his superior refuses, insisting he did no wrong in letting the innocent boy live, and then departs the scene. That boy was born from an ancient demon clan that once spread terror through humanity, making countless people live in fear. But there came a single warrior brave enough to oppose them. This warrior was Momotaro, the famed swordsman who cut down hundreds of Oni by himself, starting a never-ending conflict with the entire tribe. That same feud set the stage for the tragedy at hand. From that day, 15 years pass. The story then moves to the upper floor of a liquor shop owned by the Akinos family. That upper floor is home to Shiki Akinos, a high schooler who strangely keeps a whole arsenal of firearms. While chatting on the phone with a friend, Shiki boasts that he's just been expelled after a fight. His friend feels responsible, since Shiki jumped in to defend him, but Shiki brushes it off, saying no one is to blame, then ends the call. His father, Chiloshi, storms into the room after hearing the news and angrily smacks him across the head. Shiki doesn't care in the slightest, telling him not to get worked up over something meaningless. To Chiloshi, though, it's anything but meaningless. He tries to scold Shiki properly, but it's impossible when his son dodges him with inhuman reflexes. Eventually calming himself, Chiloshi demands to know why his son's room looks like a gun shop straight out of a video game. Shiki snaps back, telling him to shut up, then shifts the conversation by asking if it's true the liquor store is failing, since customers seem to be disappearing. Chiloshi's silence gives him away, and to save face, he mocks Shiki as nothing more than a good-for-nothing dropout. This time the insult cuts deep. Shiki retorts coldly that one day he'll be successful, unlike his father, and that he'll never become a pathetic failure like him. He twists the wound further, saying the only comfort he has is knowing they don't share the same blood. That hits Chiloshi hard, and he leaves without another word, heading back down to the shop. The phone soon rings, and a customer asks for beer delivery. Before leaving, Chiloshi glances at an old childhood photo of Shiki, showing he still loves his son. Meanwhile, Shiki seethes with anger upstairs, wishing some wealthy family had adopted him instead of being stuck with this worn-down man. To blow off steam, he picks up one of his guns and aims it at a wall target. Just as he's about to fire, a massive explosion rocks the building. Looking out the window to see what's happening, he's suddenly seized by a dark force pulling him down to the street. The attacker is revealed as Samidare, the same figure from the beginning, wielding ominous powers. He steps forward and asks for Shiki's name to confirm who he is, but before Shiki can reply, Chiloshi slams his car into Samidare and yells at Shiki to get inside. They drive off at full speed, with Chiloshi insisting the only way they'll survive is to flee the country at once. Confused and frustrated, Shiki demands answers. He wonders if Samidare is just some debt collector, and if so, ramming into him seems way too extreme. He starts panicking, worried his father might end up arrested for attempted murder, or even actual murder. Chiloshi finally snaps and tells him to shut his mouth, insisting that Samidare isn't dead. Shiki demands to know how he could possibly be so certain. They don't have the luxury of time, but Chiloshi realizes that unless he explains, his foolish son won't let it go. So, he drops a revelation almost casually. Shiki carries the blood of the Oni clan, while Samidare descends from Momotaro's line, making them destined enemies. Shiki refuses to accept it, but there's no time to argue further. Samidare suddenly appears, slashing their car with his blade before shrouding it in a suffocating black haze. Their vision gone, they're forced to abandon the vehicle, only for it to explode right after they leap out. In the chaos, the mist seizes Shiki and pulls him into a nearby warehouse. Inside, Samidare steps forward and tells Shiki not to resist, saying it's his sworn duty to wipe out Oni born like him. Chiloshi rushes in, hurriedly explaining what's happening to his son. He reminds Shiki of the tale of the eternal conflict between Momotaro and the Oni, a story Chiloshi had repeated to him throughout his childhood. He reveals that even after Momotaro's death, the war continued, carried on by his descendants who united to form an organization dedicated to hunting Oni. That group became what is now called the Momotaro Agency, and Samidare, as a descendant, is one of its warriors. Chiloshi himself once belonged to the same organization, and now he summons his own blade wrapped in black mist to stand against Samidare. Chiloshi explains that all who inherit Momotaro's blood are granted mysterious powers that allow them to wield this dark mist against Oni. Samidare mocks Chiyoshi by calling him his senpai, though his words cut deep, as Samidare views him as a traitor. Yet in Samidare's eyes, it is Chiyoshi who betrayed his own kin by raising an Oni child. Meanwhile, Shiki struggles to accept the truth unfolding before him. His pathetic father, a descendant of Momotaro, had chosen to raise his natural enemy as a son. Samidare points this out bitterly, declaring that both Chiyoshi and Shiki will die for such betrayal. Chiyoshi ignores the insult and rushes Samidare, initiating a clash that will decide who is in the right. But the younger, sharper Samidare outmatches him, sidestepping his attacks with ease and landing 2 devastating blows. Chiyoshi collapses, blood pouring out, as Shiki screams desperately for Samidare to stop. Samidare coldly tells Shiki to stay silent until it's his turn to be killed. But with his remaining strength, Chiyoshi grips Samidare's leg, infuriating him. He can't understand why this man risked everything to shield an Oni. Chiyoshi answers simply that a father doesn't need a reason to protect his child. He pleads for Shiki's life, swearing that his son has never harmed anyone and never will. Samidare's resolve falters for a moment, but he raises his sword again, determined to silence his senpai forever. At that instant, Shiki's eyes widen. He asks himself why he's watching helplessly while his father is cut down before him. Rage overwhelms him, his eyes burning red as his body trembles. His fury boils over, uncontrollable, as his blood begins to seep and his bonds unravel. Suddenly, the ropes snap apart, drenched in blood. Samidare senses movement behind him, turning just in time to see Shiki free himself. When he looks again, the boy is already crouched on the warehouse roof, drenched in crimson. Shiki launches himself at Samidare, who dodges instinctively. Fighting Onis is nothing new for Samidare, so Shiki's transformation doesn't shock him. He quickly realizes Shiki has awakened his Oni nature, controlling blood as his weapon. But that alone isn't what makes Onis so dangerous. There's a far deeper, more terrifying reason they must be destroyed. The reason Onis are hunted is because their emotions spiral out of control, making them dangerous to mankind. Samidare heads out to confront Shiki, who has completely lost his grip on himself. When Samidare makes the first strike, Shiki evades swiftly. Shiki's body twists unnaturally, summoning multiple weapons that he unleashes at Samidare. Dodging every bullet, Samidare manages to hold his ground, but when Shiki hurls a missile at him, the force is overwhelming, leaving him unable to react. He hadn't imagined Shiki's power would reach such terrifying levels. The battle rages on with Shiki moving almost without awareness, driven by instinct. He manages to catch Samidare and slams him violently. With both hands gripping his head, Shiki attacks with raw force. The sheer power shatters the entire building, reducing it to rubble. As the clash nears its end, Samidare staggers back, surprisingly still alive. A strange black mark appears on his forehead instead of death. Rising again with determination, Samidare steels himself to destroy Shiki and rid the world of Onis once and for all. As he advances, Shiki recoils, screaming in agony. Regaining fragments of control over his body, Shiki realizes in horror that he himself has caused the destruction. His screams echo in confusion as he stares at his own hands, doubting his sanity. His hands seem larger, blood dripping from them, questions flooding his mind with no answers. Samidare, however, is unsurprised. Such memory loss and bewilderment are common among Onis in transition. To him, Shiki's state is irrelevant. This was the perfect chance to finish him. Drawing his sword once more, Samidare charges in. The blade finds its mark, but shockingly, Shiki does not fall. Instead, Tsuyoshi throws himself forward at the last moment, shielding his son by taking the strike himself. Rage fills Samidare. He demands to know why Tsuyoshi would still protect the boy after witnessing the monster he had become. But a father's devotion, it seems, is unshakable. Struggling to breathe, Tsuyoshi recalls Shiki as a child calling him Dad. Hearing Shiki call out to him again brings a faint smile to Tsuyoshi face. Samidare silently wonders how far a man would go for the blood of an Oni. Meanwhile, Tsuyoshi decides that in these final moments, even brief happiness is enough. The collapse of the building draws attention across the city. People gather, whispering whether it was an explosion or some accident. Not wanting to be noticed, Samidare slips away into the shadows. This leaves Shiki and Tsuyoshi to share their final moments together. Shiki clutches his father desperately, hoping he will live, while Tsuyoshi expresses regret. He admits he should have revealed the truth of Shiki's birth, but he could never bring himself to tell his son that his life would forever be pursued by both Momotaro and Onis. With his dying breaths, Tsuyoshi gives Shiki guidance. He urges him to grow stronger, for from this day onward, he must stand alone, hunted by both sides. With those words, Tsuyoshi passes away. Shiki is devastated, unable to accept what has just happened. Only moments ago he had been laughing with his father, and now everything is gone. He cries out that he has so much left unsaid, apologies to make, feelings to confess, but there is no reply. Tears stream down as grief overwhelms him. Before he can mourn properly, a stranger approaches from behind and strikes his neck. Shiki collapses unconscious, the man coldly remarking that he is a fool to let anyone sneak up on him. Meanwhile, at Momotaro headquarters, the elders discuss Samade's reckless choice to fight without their approval. They question whether Momotaro is weakening as a force. Yet they agree firmly on one thing: Onis cannot be allowed to live among humans. They must be wiped out completely, while keeping their existence hidden from mankind. Who are these people tied up here? Better be cautious. The boy who struck Shiki earlier, Nato, dials his principal. On the other end, his principal congratulates him for successfully getting one person into the school, clearly thrilled even though he tries to hide it by saying otherwise. But the excitement is obvious. The principal then asks about the other recruits, and Nato brings up Shiki, saying he isn't sure if Shiki is truly worth the effort. Shiki, still unconscious, drifts into memories of his childhood with Tsuyoshi, running around together, laughing, and begging Tsuyoshi to carry him back home. The memory shifts dark when he recalls that Tsuyoshi has been cut off and likely killed. That painful thought snaps him awake. Bound tightly to a chair, with his mouth gagged, Shiki scans his surroundings, searching for any way to escape. Right beside him is the same unusual youth who had earlier saved him, Nato, who is training, counting numbers out loud. When Nato notices Shiki has woken, he admits he didn't want to wake him forcibly since Shiki's mind wouldn't have been able to handle the shock. Shiki, however, only cares about being freed. Nato steps closer and formally introduces himself. He declares that he is also an Oni like Shiki and reveals his horn to confirm it. He assures Shiki that his father's body is well preserved, telling him not to worry. Still, the real reason Shiki is present is for testing and potential recruitment. Nato slides a board in front of him and begins explaining. He describes the Momotaro Agency, an organization rooted in the legend of Momotaro, whose main mission is to eradicate all Oni. The strange black mist they release is one of their hallmarks, and Shiki realizes that the man he fought earlier was one of them. To resist extermination, the Oni founded their own force, the Oni Agency. Nato is a member, tasked with locating reawakened Oni and judging who is strong enough to join. Nato then tells Shiki he'll loosen the gag so that he can prove whether he's worth retrieving into the agency. The moment his mouth is freed, Shiki lashes out in anger. He demands to know where his father is. As the examiner, Nato calmly deducts 1 point from his score. He asks Shiki if he's an idiot, reminding him that he already said his father's body is safe. If his father were dead, he wouldn't have chosen that word. But Shiki doesn't trust him. He demands to be untied before they can talk properly, which makes Nato dock another point. Shiki grows even more furious, accusing Nato of being untrustworthy and declaring he wants nothing to do with the agency. Nato sees his dealing with a stubborn case and adjusts his approach. Shiki, however, realizes he's in no position to be reckless. He forces himself to calm down and shifts his tone, asking Nato politely why he keeps grading him and pleading to be unbound. He explains that he has his own goal, revenge against the man who harmed his father, and he doesn't have time to waste. He begs Nato to release him, but Nato insists on keeping him under control until he understands the full picture. Shiki, impatient and unwilling to overthink, keeps resisting. Since reason isn't working, Nato opts for a different method. His task is to evaluate Shiki's abilities, and if Shiki won't show them voluntarily, he'll draw them out. Pulling out a red tie, he remarks that Shiki seems like the type who might handle ties well. Because Shiki refuses to cooperate, Nato decides to push him to the brink by strangling him until he's on the edge of death. At that point, he believes Shiki will reveal his true potential. Moving behind him, Nato wraps the tie around Shiki's neck and begins choking him, saying that when death is near, the real self always surfaces. As the air leaves him, Shiki instinctively fights back. Facing the possibility of death forces him to make a choice, give in and lose his one chance for revenge, or resist. He refuses to let death rob him of that purpose. His emotions, passion, dread, and unease merge into a single instinct: survival. As his eyes blaze crimson and his body leaks blood, it becomes clear that his transformation into an Oni is imminent. Abruptly, his movements cease, leading Nato to believe Shiki has perished. But the blood soaking the floor begins to swirl and reform, and Shiki erupts into a frenzy. He lunges toward Nato with savage intent. Nato understands well that in this state, Shiki has no command over himself. Whatever actions he takes, he won't recall afterward. With steady hands, Nato lifts his blood-soaked umbrella, bracing for the attack. If such force had struck a regular human, the outcome would have been devastating. Against Nato, however, who has mastery over his own powers, the clash becomes more of a lesson than a threat. Instead of punishing Shiki, he uses it as a chance to show him the reality of his weakness. When Shiki later regains consciousness, he notices his hand stained in blood and altered in form. He has no memory of the chaos. Nato calmly explains that when an Oni succumbs to frenzy, both mind and body are consumed, leaving nothing but emptiness afterward. Shiki then spots Nato holding a bloody weapon and assumes he too had lost control. But Nato corrects him: he doesn't fall into madness, he manipulates his blood consciously. He points out bluntly that Shiki lacks control over himself, making him useless as an ally. He refuses to accept someone who could jeopardize the group. Before leaving, Shiki studies him, realizing the strength Nato possesses. If he could stay by his side, perhaps his own path of vengeance would be possible. Lowering his pride, he bows and begs Nato to take him along. But Nato is unmoved. He refuses to carry a liability and even declares that an Oni unable to harness his abilities should not be allowed to live. To prove his point, he pierces his own flesh, drawing blood as a weapon, ready to eliminate Shiki. Faced with death, Shiki has no choice but to retaliate. He rushes forward, and Nato, intrigued by what Shiki might reveal, steadies himself. Expecting Shiki to lose control again, Nato braces for the usual berserk charge. Instead, Shiki lands on Nato's umbrella defense and surprises him. He forges a gun from his Oni blood and fires. Though the shot is powerful, Nato withstands it and knocks Shiki away. Struggling to his feet, Shiki insists that this proves his control. But Nato dismisses it as coincidence, convinced it cannot be sustained. True to his words, Shiki begins to slip toward frenzy again, though this time he desperately resists. The blood surging through him pushes toward madness, yet he grips himself and refuses to surrender. Against all odds, he halts the transformation. Nato is stunned. Never before has he witnessed someone wrestle down the Oni blood with such defiance. Shiki hadn't just resisted the berserk state, he restrained it completely. Nato demands to know how, but Shiki smirks and replies that he'll only reveal the secret if Nato accepts him as a follower. Seeking to impress further, he explains, he simply copied Nato's method. Watching how Nato had pricked his finger to summon the umbrella, Shiki imagined his own mind constructing a weapon. Believing it possible, he shaped his thoughts into a gun, and his Oni blood obeyed. Nato is unconvinced. Oni blood doesn't operate on belief, he argues. For him, reason and Oni instincts are opposites. Balance can only be achieved by letting a mental guard restrain the berserk impulse and borrowing a fraction of its strength. But Shiki's process is unlike anything Nato knows. In his mind, he doesn't restrain the berserk force, he fights it. He challenges the inner guard, overpowers it, then bargains with the frenzy itself to lend him strength without consuming him. Though irrational, this strange method fits him perfectly, making Shiki uniquely suited to wield such chaotic power. As Nato weighs everything in his mind, Shiki continues pleading desperately. He admits he knows he's weak and useless for now, but insists that if Nato accepts him and he grows strong enough to avenge his father, then one day he might be of value to Nato. Yet again, Nato rejects him. Approaching with a blood-stained spear in hand, Nato warns Shiki that he has no choice but to end him here. He thrusts the weapon forward, but instead of killing Shiki, the spear only pierces his side. At that moment, Nato makes it clear Shiki won't be his subordinate. Instead, he will take Shiki in as his student. From the very beginning, Nato reveals he already knew Shiki had passed the test. Still, he refuses to disclose what the actual test question was. To help Shiki understand the bigger picture, he explains that the place they are standing, the mountain and river terrain, is where his master once trained. This place is known as the Hell's Threshold, or Onigashima. Within this land lies the Rasatu Academy, but it is no ordinary institution. It is where young Onis who have awakened are trained, learning how to fight, master their blood, prevent themselves from going berserk, and understand the history of Onis versus the Momotaros, along with how to confront their enemies. It is a school built solely for Onis, and this is where Shiki is to enroll as well. Though Shiki is frustrated at the thought of being sent back, if it means he can achieve his ultimate revenge, then he accepts. He questions Nato if he can truly become stronger, and Nato assures him that strength will be only one of many things he'll gain. With that, Shiki agrees. To add to the shock, Nato also reveals that he will be Shiki's homeroom instructor. The other students are all young Onis too, some already showing better control over their powers. Nato brings Shiki to wash up, but when Shiki emerges, he notices his horns haven't disappeared. Complaining about it, he asks Nato who is mid-exercise, and Nato explains it's the mark of awakening. Once Shiki grows stronger, he'll gain the ability to suppress or reveal his horns at will. Dressed in his new academy uniform, Shiki prepares for this new path. Still, before moving forward, Shiki demands to know who ended his father's life. Nato explains he preserved the body in the morgue, not knowing what kind of burial Shiki would want. He advises Shiki not to waste time mourning, but instead to channel that pain into growing stronger and carrying out his revenge properly. Without pause, Nato dashes toward the classrooms and orders Shiki to beat him there if he doesn't want to be expelled. Shiki runs with all he has and manages to arrive. At the classroom door, Shiki tries to catch his breath to make a proud entrance, but Nato isn't patient, he kicks him straight inside. Shiki crashes to the ground, nose bleeding. Worried about looking weak, he immediately turns to one of the students, Jin Kugasaki, and mocks him for lacking horns, asking for tissue. Jin smirks and reminds him that only Onis who can't fully control their powers have visible horns. He then reveals his own horns. Other classmates, Ikari, Kuina, Juji, and Homa, who also have their horns showing and are still struggling with their control, protest against Jin's arrogance. On their very first day, tensions rise to the point of a fight breaking out. Nato quickly slams Shiki down into a seat and orders them all to settle. Both Shiki and Jin are shocked at how Nato managed to appear behind them so quickly. As their first lesson, Nato announces they'll be playing a game of tag. He leads them into the dense Shinra forest and explains the rules. They must all make their way back to the academy. Anyone he manages to catch will be expelled on the spot, and the game will end. To give them a chance, he declares he won't use his blood, though they are allowed to. But if any of them lose control and go berserk, then he will unleash his blood. When Shiki reacts with disbelief, Nato reminds him this is no ordinary academy. This is where those destined to face the Momotaro agency are trained, and they must be prepared from day one. Jin asks what the outcome would be if someone killed Nato, since Nato isn't relying on his own blood. Nato replies that if anyone manages to kill him, that person will instantly graduate and receive any position of their choice. This makes Shiki stop and think. Graduation would mean he's strong enough to face his father's killers, but is he really prepared to kill his teacher right now? His answer is no. Noticing that everyone else is ready for the trial except for Shiki, who's still distracted, Nato calls him out. Shiki grins, already curious about what kind of path awaits him. This marks the very first exam for Shiki and the rest of the newcomers at Resetsu Academy, an event formerly called Oni Tag. To explain Oni Tag again, the participants must make it back to the academy within an hour while avoiding capture by the one playing as it, their homeroom teacher, Nato. He then adds another twist. In order to reach the goal, each student must have one of two special orbs. After saying this, Nato immediately hurls the orbs far away, reminding the students that returning without one doesn't count. Juji then asks how everyone is supposed to pass if only two orbs exist. Before Nato responds, Ikari pieces it together. The students will have to battle one another for the orbs. Nato confirms it, further explaining that they'll be divided into 3 groups. He assigns Homa, Shiki, and Jin to the first group, places Ikari and Juji into the second, and puts Rokuro and Kuima in the third. Since groups 2 and 3 have only 2 members each, they will only fight over a single orb. That means while Group 1 has a chance for 2 people to advance, only one from Groups 2 and 3 can succeed. In short, at least 3 rookies are destined to be expelled after this round. With the explanation finished, Nato orders them to prepare, but Shiki suddenly protests, saying he doesn't want to be teamed with Jin, whom he mocks as a masked freak. Nato shuts this down, declaring that if any student has issues with the teacher's rules, they're free to quit the academy. The same applies to Shiki. Since he doesn't want to be expelled, he has no choice but to follow the rules. Homari, who is timid, gently approaches Shiki and admits she isn't very skilled at being the Oni, promising to do her best not to hinder him. Shiki is stunned, an actual girl just spoke to him. Because he's always been shunned for being a delinquent, this is the first time he's had a real conversation with a girl. Overwhelmed, he falls for her instantly and vows to protect her. Homari, embarrassed, tells him that's not what she meant, she only wanted to introduce herself. She then tries speaking to Jin, but he completely ignores her, which leaves her on the verge of tears. Shiki steps in, furious that Jin upset her, and comforts her instead. He tells her that someone as cute as her shouldn't cry, then awkwardly adds that her tears make her look even cuter, only to quickly correct himself again, saying she'd look even more adorable if she smiled. He whispers that only the two of them should cooperate to pass the test. Now calm again, Homari feels reassured, while Shiki goes back to taunting Jin. Jin, unaffected, calls Shiki an attention seeker for constantly picking fights with him. He warns Shiki to just give up, since he's destined to be expelled anyway. But Shiki refuses, insisting he has a purpose and will graduate from the academy to fulfill it. Jin sneers that Shiki's ambition is just as worthless as his very existence, which instantly fuels Shiki's anger. But before he can recklessly pick another pointless fight and waste everyone's time, Nato steps in, stopping him. Nato orders Shiki and the rest of Group 1 to head into the test area, explaining that once they complete the challenge, Group 2 and Group 3 will proceed in order. Without hesitation, both Jin and Shiki rush inside in search of the orb, while Homer lingers behind, paralyzed by uncertainty. As they move through the woods, Jin drops a clue about his true purpose. He wants to enlist in a unit to reunite with someone important. To reach that goal, he's willing to do anything, even murder Nato, since that would immediately graduate him and let him choose any Oni squad he wants. Shiki, meanwhile, chases Jin down, furious about the insult to his dream, gripping a wooden stick as his weapon. He threatens Jin, demanding he either retracts his words or fights. Tired of Shiki's pestering, Jin pulls off his mask for a moment, revealing his horribly scarred face, and prepares for combat. Shiki shows no fear, boldly telling Jin to come at him. In response, Jin channels his Oni blood, forming sharp drill-like constructs on his arm with frightening precision. Shiki, who can barely summon control over his Oni blood, realizes too late that he chose the wrong fight. Even so, he admits he isn't skilled yet but refuses to back down, declaring that he has to protect the honor of his father's death, something Jin had mocked as meaningless. Hearing this, Jin learns for the first time that Shiki's drive comes from avenging his father, which only excites him further. Shiki bites his fingers to transform his blood into a weapon, but unlike when he faced Nato, nothing happens. With no choice, he relies on the wooden stick, and as expected, Jin easily outmatches him, swinging so powerfully he slices an entire tree in half. Elsewhere, Hammer stumbles and crashes to the ground, sinking into despair. She convinces herself she doesn't belong here, being weak and lacking confidence. She recalls Shiki once telling her he wanted to partner with her, but deep down she knows she can't keep depending on others. Still, she pushes forward toward the loud crash from Jin and Shiki's fight, unaware that one of the orbs is sitting right behind her. Back at the battle, Shiki struggles to land even a single strike, while Jin tosses him around with ease, barely putting effort into the fight. Shiki's mind drifts toward how he can possibly master his Oni blood. Leaving him distracted, Jin punishes this mistake with a brutal punch across his face. As Shiki lies on the ground, dazed, he realizes he's never felt so helpless before. As a boy, Shiki was always stubborn and naturally stronger than anyone who stood against him. He assumed things would be the same here, but he's learning quickly that others are far beyond his level. Jin doesn't even spare him a glance as he walks away, mocking him by saying he didn't even need to use his blood to win, proving just how useless Shiki is. Shiki, still seething, swears he'll get his revenge. Jin, however, dismisses him entirely, calling him pathetic and saying he'd be better off dead. Without hesitation, Jin unleashes a bloody attack straight at him. At the same time, Omar, who has been searching for them in the forest, stumbles upon the scene. The girl rushes forward innocently, unaware she's running into the middle of a deadly clash. The crimson weapon hurtles closer, and her eyes widen as she notices it. Tension spikes, the atmosphere turning deadly as it seems like this attack could kill them both. But remembering his promise to protect her, Shiki throws himself forward, determined to shield her no matter the cost. He embraces her tightly, and once the assault passes, he finally lets her go. However, he's wounded, and some of his blood stains her body. He heads toward Jin, demanding an explanation for his reckless actions that endangered everyone. Jin shows no remorse for what he's done. He claims it isn't his responsibility, saying the weak deserve death. Homer notices the injury on Shiki's body and is filled with guilt. Lowering her head, she apologizes for causing his injury, but he assures her it wasn't her fault, it was Jin's. Despite his words, she continues bowing and pleading, her sorrow turning her tears into blood. From those crimson tears, a monstrous being emerges, terrifying in form. Oni carry blood with unique properties, capable of creating abominations. Homer recognizes how dangerous this creature is and knows she has no control over it. She begs them to flee before the beast slaughters them. The creature charges forward, overwhelming them to the brink of destruction. Elsewhere, Nato observes the chaos as the principal addresses him. The principal reminds him that the day was meant for orientation, not a battlefield. Nato argues that what he's giving them is beyond classroom lessons, something far more useful. Though the principal always thought Nato lacked compassion, he knows some part of him is capable of it. He explains how many Onis die in childhood, with some perishing simply from their heritage. Others are taken away for experiments. He wonders what thoughts cross their minds in their final moments, but Nato is unmoved. To Nato, weak Onis have no right to live. Meanwhile, Shiki survives the creature's assault and wonders whether Jin made it through. Jin suddenly emerges from the trees, charging back into the fight. Shiki approaches Homer, asking if she can rein in the monster, but she admits she cannot. It's feeding on her blood, draining her strength, and he realizes he must get her to safety. As he nears her, the creature unexpectedly shields her. He questions why it would protect her, but presses forward regardless. The beast spews a bloody breath, knocking him aside. Then he hears Homer call the monster Sis, realizing it stems from her trauma. Homer urges him to escape, but he refuses. He warns her she's losing too much blood and won't last long. She disregards her own life, accepting death, while he refuses to. He can't ignore that she's fading, and he desperately wants to save her. Acknowledging his weakness is painful, even humiliating. Memories of his father's death haunt him, how powerless he was then, and how helpless he still is now. Tears fall, yet his blood fails to produce anything. JYN appears, mocking him, telling him to leave if he intends to weep. Despite his own injuries from the creature, JYN rushes to fight, knowing that retreat would mean certain death. Wounding himself deliberately, he summons the Eclipse blood release. 2 weapons materialize from his blood, astonishing Nido, who is watching from afar. For a young Oni, controlling blood enough to forge even one weapon demands immense effort, as the mind shapes the blood into something familiar. Some produce favored weapons, while others manifest scars of their trauma. Either way, it requires precision. JYN knows Shiki's earlier release was nothing but luck, he lacks the ability to summon anything now. JYN launches at the monster, aiming to sever its head, but the beast defends itself. He leaps back as the creature counterattacks. He keeps slicing apart the streams of blood with his blade, while Shiki watches intently, questioning why he is so powerless that he can't even manifest a weapon. In that moment, it hits him. Every weapon JYN has brought forth so far is made to cut. That means his own ability might be limited to producing cutting tools. He remembers earlier when he had managed to form a gun and recalls how, as a child, he was always fascinated by firearms. Trying to figure out what weapon he could manifest again, he focuses. Meanwhile, JYN's clash with the beast grows more violent, and Nato realizes he can't just sit back any longer, he prepares to step in. Before he moves, the monster lets out a loud cry, only for Shiki to command it to shut up. Their eyes shift toward Shiki, who has just managed to shape his blood into a firearm. Nato feels relieved that Shiki finally understands his ability. Shiki pulls the trigger, and the bullet tears through the creature's skull, leaving JYN shocked while Shiki himself beams with pride. At last, he has figured out his weapon. But what does that mean now? With his gun ready, Shiki takes his stance to fight, while JYN watches carefully to see how he will wield it. Even the monster seems unprepared for what's about to come. Shiki, full of confidence, fires 3 consecutive shots. The energy released isn't ordinary, unnatural and overwhelming. Even for an Oni, the destructive force is enough to crush the beast entirely. The creature's body bursts apart, its head flying off. Nato is stunned, wondering what sort of energy the weapon produced. It was beyond anything he could have anticipated. But then, as if nature itself reacted, blood like rain begins falling from above, mixing with water droplets. It wasn't only that Shiki's bullet killed the monster, it even altered the weather. Such power was terrifying. Hammer, however, is drained, her blood loss is severe. She staggers and collapses from weakness. Shiki, pitying her condition, tries desperately to crawl toward her to help. Yet, he himself is too weak. He collapses midway, barely able to drag himself forward. Nato approaches and explains that he has expended far too much blood. That's why his body feels faint and his memory is clouded. Shiki knows he's correct, but refuses to give in. Struggling to rise, Shiki stubbornly claims he can still stand. But the moment he tries, he falls again, this time harder. Nato doesn't comfort him. Instead, he criticizes Shiki, saying he lacks discipline over his power, and if he keeps wasting his blood recklessly, he will bleed out and die. His death, Nato remarks, would mean little, as Shiki is worthless. Yet even so, Nato can't ignore the strength Shiki displayed. Shiki, despite his state, pleads for Nato to assist Hammer first. Nato stares at him in disbelief. How could he still think of others in this condition? But before he can move to help, Jin appears and ambushes him. Nato deflects the strike, and Jin demands a fight. Nato points out that two of his comrades are lying injured on the ground, but Jin dismisses it coldly. They don't matter, he says, it isn't his concern. Jin declares that if he kills Nato, he immediately secures graduation, so Nato is his only objective. Realizing Jin's selfishness, Nato opens his umbrella, readying for battle. He remarks that he treats all his students equally, regardless of ability, and despises those who judge others. Jin doesn't care about approval, his only aim is to kill Nato, graduate, and gain the assignment he desires. Nato understands what drives him but holds firm to his vow not to rely on blood powers. Still, he refuses to go easy on Jin. Jin is enraged, feeling insulted that Nato doesn't regard him as a true threat. He attacks, forming a blood blade, but he underestimates Nato's umbrella, it isn't an ordinary weapon. Before Jin closes the distance, Nato releases a gas from it. The mist blinds Jin, clouding his vision. He assumes Nato plans to strike at close range, thinking he just needs to regain his sight to block it. What he doesn't realize is that Nato has already read him completely. Nato opens fire with rubber bullets aimed at him. Jin quickly retreats and manages to conceal himself behind a tree. Nato then remarks that he knows Jin is already hurt from the Titan he previously faced, which means his hands are a weak spot he can target. Still, Jin has no need to panic, those bullets won't finish him off. And for anyone thinking his combat is limited to close range, Jin has another surprise. He summons a weapon known as the Blood Splitters, capable of attacking from a distance. He hurls the splitters toward Nato, who never considered that Jin could also fight long range. Skilled as he is, Nato dodges the assault and responds by tossing a grenade to disorient Jin. He then lunges forward, landing a solid punch that sends Jin stumbling back. Mocking him, Nato says if this were a real battle, Jin would already be dead. Convinced Jin lacks the strength to rise again, he presses his umbrella down on him, pinning him tighter, and challenges him to break free. He taunts that Jin is desperate to pass quickly just to reunite with his father. Jin is shaken that Nato knows his past, but isn't it natural for a teacher to know his student? Nato discloses that Jin's father is a Momotaro, shocking Shiki. The difference, however, is that Shiki's father was caring and protective, while Jin's father was the complete opposite. Jin's father abused him, slaughtered his entire family, and ruined his life. Jin barely survived by scavenging for food, his body now covered in scars inflicted by his own parent. Those scars are proof of his single-minded resolve, the resolve to kill his father. Because of this obsession, he refuses to be killed by anything else. Dying by another's hand is not an option for him. Straining against the umbrella's hold, Jin forces his way out. But before he can retaliate, Nato counters and slams him back down. Before departing, Nato leaves him with a lesson: dying for a goal has no meaning. Living for it does. If Jin continues with his reckless mindset, he won't survive another day. His tragic past earns no sympathy from Nato. Instead, Nato restrains Jin to a tree and contacts the school infirmary, reporting that Homer fainted and Jin was tied up, telling them to pick both up. Meanwhile, outside the gates, the students anxiously await the day's outcome. Nato then turns to Shiki, who struggles to his feet and insists he still has strength left to chase their target, the ball. Nato warns he has just 5 minutes left to secure it. To raise the stakes, Nato reveals that he already found one of the balls himself. He presents Shiki with 2 choices: fight him directly to claim the ball, or track down the last one elsewhere. Either way, Shiki's future at the school will be decided in 5 minutes. Shiki bolts off immediately, making Nato think he is searching for the other ball, so he takes off after him. But once Nato is gone, Shiki circles back from the forest and approaches Jin. He pleads for Jin's help, admitting that he can't defeat Nato alone, and offers to free him in exchange. Jin refuses outright. He would rather remain bound than owe a debt to Shiki. He says he'd sooner die than accept such aid. Shiki tries to reason with him, saying sometimes joining forces with an enemy is necessary to achieve one's aims. He points out that their objectives align, revealing that his own father is also a Momotaro. Still, he accepts Jin's rejection. Indeed, Jin remains firm with his refusal. When Nato returns to the forest and doesn't spot Shiki, he assumes Shiki has already headed back. Shiki, meanwhile, storms into the woods, cursing Jin as he runs. In the middle of the forest, he collides with Nato, and before they can even start a fight, Jin leaps out from behind Nato to launch an attack. That's when Nato realizes Shiki and Jin have actually teamed up against him. Earlier, Jin had refused Shiki's request to play decoy so he could ambush Nato from behind. Instead, Jin insisted on being the one to strike from the shadows, leaving Shiki no choice but to go along with it. Together, they managed to catch Nato off guard, using the very rope Nato had bound Jin with to restrain him instead. They attempt to drag Nato off, but he quickly understands their tactic. It's a test of stamina, and he's much stronger than the 2 of them combined. What he doesn't realize is that they're planning something more. Suddenly, Jin hurls his blood splatters at Nato, throwing him off balance. The moment Nato stumbles, Shiki charges forward to seize the ball. As Shiki collides with him, the ball slips free and lands right near Jin. Now Nato watches carefully, wondering how the boys will handle this moment. Whoever grabs the ball first will have to fight off the other to keep it. With less than 3 minutes left until the finish, the tension is high. Shiki, without thinking, shouts at Jin to take the ball so they can secure victory. Jin snatches it and starts sprinting, while Nato questions whether Shiki's command was an act of kindness or sheer stupidity. He reminds Shiki of the rules: whoever holds the ball at the end wins, while the other is expelled. It dawns on Shiki that he's just handed Jin the chance at victory, meaning his own loss. Shiki screams in frustration, thrashing on the ground at the thought of failure. Nato silently observes, realizing Shiki acts impulsively, never considering consequences beyond the moment. As Jin runs, his promise to Shiki resurfaces in his mind. He had vowed to help Shiki win. Keeping the ball would betray that agreement and steal Shiki's victory. Wrestling with his conscience, Jin turns back. Shiki, still in despair, looks up in disbelief to see Jin racing toward him again. At first, he thinks Jin must be insane, but Jin yells that he refuses to owe anyone a debt. Even if it costs him expulsion, he would rather return the ball than win unfairly. Just then, a small animal approaches. Curious, Shiki edges closer, while Nato identifies it as a mukin. These creatures are messenger birds used by the Onis for urgent and secret deliveries. Its presence can only mean something serious has happened. Nato retrieves the letter it carries, an urgent message from the Kyoto agency. They have been attacked by Momotaro and are requesting aid. The exercise ends instantly, and everyone heads for the gate. Fortunately for Jin and Shiki, the other students waiting there assume Homer was the one who failed the match. Nato clarifies that Homer had lost control of her blood and was taken to the infirmary. He then announces the end of the trial and that they'll all be traveling to Kyoto to provide support. On the way, Shiki practices concealing his horns, while the rest of the group worries about sailing openly into a besieged city. Fear spreads as they imagine dying in the conflict. Nato reassures them they won't be fighting. Their role is purely support. He explains that every city's Oni agency is divided into 2 divisions. One engages directly in combat, while the other provides assistance. Since Onis bleed heavily and can't rely on hospitals, the support team is essential to care for the wounded and stabilize them. Both divisions, he stresses, are vital to the mission's success. Shiki, however, feels disheartened by the idea of only providing aid. What troubles him most is the thought, what if the Momotaro who killed his father is in Kyoto? Noticing his inner turmoil, Nato calmly tells him the Momotaro he seeks will not be there. Momotaros also operate through organized branches. The group begins to wonder which type of Momotaro they'll encounter, and Nato unexpectedly tells them it's a particularly wild one. Shortly after, Nato leads his rookie trainees to what looks like a normal Kyoto eatery, but the place is only a disguise. Behind it lies one of the covert headquarters of the Oni agency. The elderly woman who runs the restaurant greets them warmly, then guides the group into a back room that conceals a hidden stairway, leading down into an underground passage. Elsewhere, two high-ranking figures from the Momotaro agency disclose that they have already slaughtered a number of Oni. These two are Tsubakiri Momomaya, captain of the Momotaro agency, and Yomagi Momokusa, his vice-captain. Yomagi complains that Tsubakiri has once again gone too far, leaving chaos in his wake. Tsubakiri brushes it off, caring nothing about the aftermath. His obsession is wiping out more Oni, and he even voices his desire to capture a female Oni someday for his twisted research. Yomagi calls out how vile his experiments are and points to one of his grotesque results, an unnatural beast mixed from a dog, monkey, and bird. Tsubakiri pretends to be hurt, claiming his work, which he dubs anti-Oni bioweapons, are loyal companions that only consume Oni. Yomagi scolds him further, urging him to focus more seriously on his actual missions rather than indulging in cruel science. Tsubakiri retorts that his studies of Oni blood are necessary because he aims to master it, with his ultimate ambition being to convert their regenerative ability into a usable drug. Yomagi keeps pressing the issue, and while they bicker, the view shifts to reveal a frightened young Oni hiding nearby, trembling at Tsubakiri's words. But both captains already sensed his presence, and once their quarrel ends, Yomagi assaults the boy, degrading him by calling him an it. During the beating, a drop of blood stains Tsubakiri's coat. Enraged, he decides to torment the child himself, unleashing his Momotaro powers. He levitates the mutilated Oni remains and cruelly asks the boy to identify which parts belong to his parents. Too scared to answer, the child stays silent before Tsubakiri mercilessly crushes him under a heap of corpses. Yomagi gives a quick explanation of his partner's ability. Momotaro fighters harness a unique black bacteria within their bodies, using it to craft weapons or release spores. Tsubakiri's variation is especially horrifying, as he manipulates the bodies of dead Oni with it, a power that even unsettles Yomagi. After the brutal scene, Tsubakiri orders his monstrous pet, Ugly, to devour the leftover remains. Meanwhile, Shiki, the rest of the students, and teacher Nato continue through the underground corridor until they reach the Oni agency's main Kyoto base. Inside, Shiki is amazed at the sheer scale of the hidden compound. From a nearby room, a lively disturbance catches their attention before a man named Kyoka appears. He greets Nato like an old friend, though the feeling doesn't seem mutual. Spotting a pretty female student among the group, Kyoka instantly tidies his hair and boldly asks for her contact. This flirtatious man is actually the commander of the Oni agency's Kyoto support unit, and he proudly introduces himself as Nato's former classmate. Nato, unimpressed and unwilling to waste time, leaves immediately for the battlefield. Shiki wishes to follow, but Nato departs alone, leaving Kyoka in charge of all the Resetsu Academy students. Kyoka escorts them inside, where a nurse first assists in changing their clothes. Once ready, she guides them into the main hall, where several wounded Oni are being treated under Kyoka's supervision, as she is the chief physician. Shiki notices one patient in a dire state, missing 3 limbs, and the nurse remarks that if he were left on the battlefield, he wouldn't have survived beyond a few minutes. Still, Kyoka is certain she can save him and immediately gathers a large amount of Oni blood to begin the operation. Meanwhile, the captain and vice-captain of the Momotaro agency remain out on an Oni hunt. This time, however, they are only clashing with a group of weak Oni underlings, leaving Tsubakiri dissatisfied since he had hoped for something more challenging. His mood shifts when Nato appears, skipping any form of casual talk. Without hesitation, Nato unleashes his Blood Eclipse ability, transforming his blood into multiple archers that rain arrows toward Tsubakiri. In return, Tsubakiri shields himself using the bodies of fallen Oni, revealing that he and Nato have crossed paths in the past. With his usual twisted humor, he notes how perfect Oni corpses are as barricades. He then questions whether Nato is aware of a location where the Oni of Kyoto have been gathering. Tsubakiri declares his plan to find that place and wipe them all out, convinced it would finally bring an end to Kyoto's Oni issue. Nato responds that he knows nothing of such a spot, but coldly promises to send Tsubakiri to a gathering place of his own, hell itself. Back in the hall, Kyoka injects all the stored blood into his arm, baffling Shiki, who assumed the bags were reserved for treating the wounded. His interruptions irritate the nurse, who sternly tells him to remain silent. Kyoka then asks the badly injured patient which limb he wishes restored first. Barely able to speak, the man pleads for his arm, desperate to hold his children once more. Following his request, Kyoka makes the patient drink his blood, which greatly accelerates an Oni's natural recovery. The agony is unbearable, forcing the students to restrain him as the treatment takes effect. Shiki observes that every blood bag has been emptied, prompting the nurse to order more to be fetched. Soon, the patient's arm begins to regenerate, a grotesque yet inspiring sight. Afterward, the wounds across his chest knit together as well, astonishing Shiki. Excitedly, he asks if the man's legs will regrow too. Kyoka assures him that they will, but warns that the healing must proceed gradually, otherwise the patient's body may form antibodies that reject Kyoka's blood. Nevertheless, Kyoka delivers the unfortunate news that the man can no longer remain in the combat division and will instead be assigned to the support corps. Lightening the mood, Kyoka jokes about giving him prosthetic legs so he can walk, and maybe even chase his children around, until his real legs regenerate. Overcome with gratitude, the patient realizes Kyoka is trying to encourage him, and with tears in his eyes, he thanks the doctor for granting him another chance at life. Kyoka rises and addresses the students, urging them to accept reality. In every war, tragedies like this occur, and the day may come when one of them ends up as a patient too. He admits that he understands why many are eager to join the front lines. He feels the same way, but because his Oni heritage grants him exceptional healing rather than combat strength, he has to make use of his abilities in the support division. Still, Kyoka reminds them that the Oni can charge into battles without hesitation only because the support unit stands behind them. His words inspire the students, and Shiki becomes especially moved, vowing that he will never fail Kyoka's expectations. At that point, Kyoka assigns Shiki a responsibility. He wants him to look after an Oni girl named Mai, who is quietly sitting in the garden chamber of their base. Kyoka explains that Mai had been attacked by the Momotaro just a day earlier and was brought in for care. Since her parents may no longer be alive, Kyoka hopes Shiki can provide comfort, knowing that Shiki is one of the gentler souls among the group. Shiki agrees and approaches her, asking if she finds it surprising that there's a pond right in the middle of this underground facility. Mai doesn't reply, so he tries again, wondering if her parents were Studio Ghibli fans since they gave her the name Mai, like the famous character. When she still stays silent, Shiki invites her to visit Iruadadra with him. This time, Mai answers, asking what Iruadadra is, and admits that she lacks common knowledge because she never attended school. Shiki is curious, but before he can continue the conversation, he hears an uproar. The support unit has just returned, carrying with them numerous Oni corpses recovered from Kyoto. When Mai sees the bodies, she is horrified to realize her parents are among them. Elsewhere, Tsubakiri tells Nato that he left something behind at his last battlefield. He explains that he intentionally didn't feed some Oni corpses to his beast, but instead tainted them with his black bacteria, expecting the Oni agency support unit to unknowingly bring them back to their base. Tsubakiri can no longer contain his thrill, eager to manipulate the fallen bodies from afar and stir chaos at the Oni stronghold. To confirm whether they've arrived, he takes control of one, Mai's father. Mai's heart leaps with happiness, believing her dad has returned, but her joy instantly turns to terror when he suddenly grips her throat and tries to strangle her. Sensing Tsubakiri's involvement, Kyoka urgently instructs Shiki to cover Mai's eyes before driving a blade into the reanimated father's skull, cutting off the enemy's control. Though Shiki has no clue who Tsubakiri truly is, he swears vengeance for subjecting Mai to such cruelty. Under Tsubakiri's command, the dead Oni begin to slaughter the support squad members, even tearing apart the injured Oni who had just escaped the battlefield. In the midst of the turmoil, Kyoka struggles to hold command while being swarmed by a dozen corpses. Shiki meanwhile is being throttled by Mai's mother, while the helpless girl sobs, begging her mom to stop. Having just watched her father die in front of her, Shiki knows he can't simply stab her mother before her eyes as well. Because Shiki's control over his Oni powers is still weak, Nato had equipped him with a handgun. Back when they traveled by ship to this city, the bullets had been fused with his own blood, making them far deadlier than normal rounds. With his life hanging in the balance, he makes the painful choice, pulling Mai into his chest so she doesn't see what follows, and shooting her zombified mother in the head. He then fires at the corpses encircling Kyoka, freeing him. Knowing he isn't in condition to fight, Koka leaves Shiki in charge of the battle while he hurries off to evacuate the wounded. At the same time, the other students struggle against the reanimated Oni, but lacking proper blood mastery, they're forced to rely only on their bare fists. After a long struggle, they manage to knock down several corpses, but each one rises again. Shiki arrives and informs everyone that these reanimated Oni are under Amamotaro's control and can only be stopped by destroying their brains. Jin then unleashes his Blood Eclipse technique, cutting through the advancing foes. Meanwhile, Shiki grimly continues firing, likening it to playing a grim version of Call of Duty. Each shot weighs heavily on him, knowing these were once people with loved ones, but for the sake of survival, he doesn't stop. Kyoka, on the other hand, focuses on restoring order, commanding his men to get all patients out of danger. Shiki is on the verge of tears. His foe is Amamotaro, yet he's forced to slaughter his own kin against his will. The thought tears at his mind, and on the opposite side, Tsubakiri, picturing the same chaos unfolding at the Oni agency's base, bursts into mocking laughter at the scene. Nato realizes he must act before things spiral out of control, so he unsheathes his weapon, the Umbrella Sword. As he charges toward Tsubakiri, the smug villain doesn't flinch, instead dragging Oni corpses in front of himself as shields, making a twisted joke about Nato turning them into an Oni skewer. In that moment, Nato doesn't notice Tsubakiri's beast, Ugly, sneaking up from behind. Just as the monster swings a blow at him, he evades, causing the makeshift Oni skewer to absorb the strike. Nato's expression hardens with grief, seeing his fallen comrades desecrated and ridiculed even in death. Picking up on this, Tsubakiri taunts him cruelly, saying he should be thankful that these insects are being wiped out. Nato finally loses his temper and declares he'll unleash his full strength, ordering the Oni behind him to flee so they won't become liabilities. But Tsubakiri has no intention of letting anyone escape. He commands Yomugi to activate her power, using her melons to form a barrier that traps Nato and the Oni inside a dark orb. Demanding an explanation, Nato asks what this black sphere is, and with arrogant confidence Tsubakiri explains that it's Yomugi's unique ability. No one can leave unless she wills it, giving him freedom to march to the Oni agency's base and slaughter the rest before turning back to finish Nato, if he even survives. Nato keeps quiet, silently praying Tsubakiri doesn't know the hideout's location. But the villain reveals that he placed trackers on every corpse he left, and they're all pointing to one place, beneath the Iriudra building in Kyoto. With nothing more to accomplish here, Tsubakiri strolls off, cackling madly, leaving Ugly behind to play with Nato. Yomugi allows the beast to enter the dark sphere, and it happily charges in, hungry for prey. She then follows Tsubakiri, while he, as usual, boasts about his plans. Ugly, he explains, is a mass-produced type of creature, and he has countless more at his disposal. He can discard it anytime, so his next idea is to turn this one into a bomb to wipe out every Oni inside along with it. Snapping his fingers, Tsubakiri triggers the creature's stomach to swell, and before Nato can react, Ugly detonates, obliterating everything within the sphere. Looking back, Tsubakiri frowns slightly, unimpressed that the blast wasn't more spectacular. Still, he continues on, convinced the explosion erased all those vermin, including their so-called leader, Nato. Meanwhile, Shiki and his allies push themselves to finish off the endlessly regenerating Onis. When they finally destroy the last one, exhaustion sets in, and they collapse in relief that the ordeal is finally done. Koka appears, assuring them he has already evacuated the injured Oni to safety. He thanks the group for their efforts, admitting that without them the situation could have been far worse. Their attention then shifts to Mai, who stares quietly at her parents' bodies. Moved by her grief, the others gather around her. Koka tries to console the girl, while Shiki feels an even heavier guilt, remembering that it was his hand that killed her parents. He apologizes, pained by the memory of pulling the trigger. But Mai looks up at them, steady and composed, telling them they don't need to burden themselves with guilt. She confesses that fear had dictated her whole life, always running and hiding from one place to another, never even getting the chance to attend school. She knew this moment would arrive eventually, but never knew when, so she insists they shouldn't feel guilty. She tries to comfort them, telling them not to worry about her. Her words only increase Shiki's concern. A young girl who had just lost her parents should be breaking down, yet instead she is the one offering reassurance. It makes him painfully aware of how the world has turned into nothing but a breeding ground for terrorists. He struggles to picture someone so young carrying such maturity. Back when he was her age, his days were spent watching superhero shows and fantasizing about becoming one. He remembers how his father once looked at him with pride and how he would strike the same heroic pose. He begins to think that the Momotaro were supposed to be protectors, figures who gave people a safe and peaceful world. Yet in reality, they are the destroyers. If those who claim to bring peace are the true monsters, then he will balance it out by becoming the villain himself. Holding Mai close, he promises her that he will shape a world where she can one day smile without fear. But can he really fulfill that promise? He embraces her tightly while the other Onis quietly mourn, knowing their lives are seen as nothing but tools and targets by the Momotaro. Eventually, the moment of grief passes, and they are forced to carry on. Kyoto turns to Jin, saying they must gather the bodies of their fallen allies and give them a proper burial. He offers to guide Jin to the cremation grounds, mentioning that it lies along the path to their hideout, though they probably missed it earlier. Half joking, he says if not for the tragedy, he wouldn't have shown the place at all. But Jin hardly hears him, still trapped in deep thought about the horrors he had just seen. Elsewhere, Shiki and the others attempt to move the corpses, but Shiki struggles with the weight. He notices one of the boys standing idle and calls him lazy. The boy quickly explains he isn't slacking, he's thinking things through. Out of everyone, he seems to be the most rational one. He points out that since the dead bodies were reanimated and attacked them, it suggests their hideout may have been exposed, meaning the Momotaro could be close by. He reveals that his ability is primarily for reconnaissance, explaining he can manipulate his blood to detect threats nearby. Activating his blood eclipse, he spreads his ability to scan the area. He boasts that within a 5-kilometer radius, he can identify any danger and even distinguish Momotaro from Oni. A truly useful power. As he uses it, he suddenly detects Tsubakiri and Yomugi in the vicinity. The scene shifts toward Mizumoto's entrance, the Oni's hideout. Tsubakiri has already discovered it and slain the guard. Excited, he contacts headquarters, demanding they send the hounds he engineered through his experiments. When questioned about it, he laughs, saying it's merely an Oni hunting mission. To wipe out the Onis completely, he insists the dogs are necessary. He even asks for one particular beast he had saved for a special purpose. Before ending the call, he remembers the last Momotaro meeting where they discussed a unique Oni, and he orders the file on that one as well. Yomugi eyes the dark staircase leading down, assuming the hideout must be deep and filled with Onis. She asks if she should release poison first to thin them out. Tsubakiri finds the suggestion amusing but suddenly grins wickedly and declines. He declares that he wants to enter himself, to demand the Oni's names before killing them. When Yomugi asks why, he explains that there is one Oni he doesn't intend to kill, Shiki. Instead, he wants Shiki alive so he can experiment on him and uncover the mystery of his special powers. Laughing with twisted excitement, he begins his descent into the darkness. For Shiki, this is a dire turn of events. With his abilities still incomplete, how can he possibly face what is coming?